The gentle hum of jet engines echoed softly through the elite-class cabin of the Skylink air flight from Atlanta to San Francisco, a space meticulously crafted for absolute serenity and elegance. Crystal glasses caught the tender light from overhead fixtures, classical music drifted from hidden speakers, and flight attendants in sleek silver-gray uniforms moved like wisps of smoke between rows of handcrafted leather seats. In seat 2A sat a middle-aged black woman, dressed in a pale gray coat and rimless glasses, typing the final lines on her laptop. Her neatly braided hair, unbranded flats, and modest carry-on made her indistinguishable from any ordinary business traveler. One who barely stood out in a cabin accustomed to suits worth tens of thousands. But her gaze, measured, composed, and quietly piercing, was the only thing that betrayed she was far from ordinary. Aisha Kar. Isn't it? A woman's voice rang out, sharp and metallic, slicing through the carefully constructed silence. Lindsay Palmer, the lead flight attendant that day, tall with a flawlessly pinned bun, leaned toward seat 2A. Her voice carried just loud enough for those nearby to hear clearly. "I'm sorry, but this seat is reserved for Platinum Priority members. We'll help you find your correct seat in the rear cabin." A few passengers looked up from their phones. Others leaned in with curiosity, and someone in seat 4B instinctively raised their phone to record. Aisha looked up, not with anger, nor with surprise. Calmly, she closed her laptop, her nude, polished fingers moving with the precision of someone chairing a boardroom meeting. "I believe there's been a mistake," she said, reaching into her bag to retrieve an ticket displaying a clear QR code and her name, with the words Elite Class, Seat 2A, printed plainly. Lindsay glanced at the ticket, her eyes cool, then let out a soft chuckle, as if she were witnessing a poorly executed prank. "You see, fake tickets are getting quite sophisticated these days. This seat's been reserved by someone very important to the airline." A ripple of whispers spread through the nearby seats. A man in 3A clicked his tongue, while a white woman in 1D leaned toward her husband, her face betraying clear irritation. Aisha remained still, back straight, hands resting gently on her lap. In that moment, she was not merely a passenger facing a misunderstanding. She was someone watching, waiting to see whether others had the patience to uncover the truth, or whether a glance was enough to decide her worth. And as with so many times before, Aisha knew silence, when wielded at the right moment, can be sharper than any rebuttal. The air in the elite-class cabin grew noticeably thick after Lindsay Palmer's firm statement. Her gaze swept over Aisha Carter with a restrained politeness that barely masked her frustration, the kind carefully cultivated through hundreds of hours of customer service training, yet still cold enough to deliver one clear message: "You are not welcome here." Still, Aisha did not waver. She placed the ticket back on the tray, reached into her bag, and pulled out her phone with a smooth motion. On the screen, a call from Camille Brooks flashed. Aisha declined it. Seconds later, a text arrived. "Board meeting moved to 3:00 p.m. Please confirm ASAP." A slight furrow appeared between Aisha's brows, but she didn't respond. A whisper passed through the cabin. "They're kicking a black woman out of first class, even though she has a ticket." A passenger in seat 3B began filming, while a young woman in 1A looked up directly at Lindsay and asked, her voice tinged with sarcasm, "If it were me, blonde hair, wearing a suit. Would you still be checking the ticket? Lindsay held back her irritation, maintaining a paper-thin smile. We're simply following company policy. At that moment, noise from the boarding ramp caused heads to turn. A middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, a slight paunch beneath a designer suit, hurried into the cabin. His face was flushed and his voice rang out without need for a microphone. "David Langston here. Sorry I'm late. Just wrapped up a meeting." Lindsay immediately beamed with a warmth reserved for long-lost friends. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Langston. I'm just resolving a seating issue. Everything's under control." David glanced briefly at Aisha and shrugged. "I trust my assistant booked it correctly. Seat 2B, right? First class always feels easier." He settled into the seat beside Aisha, fastening his belt while casting sideways glances, as if trying to understand why someone like her would be seated next to him. Aisha remained calm, her eyes focused on her phone, where another notification from Camille lit up. "Need immediate confirmation on service incident. Legal team standing by." "What are you waiting for?" Lindsay asked for the third time, her tone now stripped of pretense. "Please vacate the seat. You are delaying the flight's departure." Aisha looked up, answering gently. "This is my seat. I confirmed it at check-in. If necessary, we can request a supervisor to proceed according to protocol." A tense silence followed. In that moment, Aisha knew with absolute clarity the test she had quietly planned for 3 weeks to evaluate the fairness of premium customer service at Skylink Air had officially begun. Not with a survey, not through end-of-month reports, but through glances, voices, and the unspoken judgments of the very people who represented the airline she led. The flight should have already begun boarding its final passengers, but the elite-class cabin was anything but settled. The captain's voice came through the overhead speakers. "Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff in 10 minutes." A simple announcement, yet Lindsay Palmer seized it as a convenient excuse. "You see," she said, "this situation is delaying our departure. Please cooperate." The last 2 words were delivered not as a request, but as a command. Aisha remained still, her expression showing no anger or defiance, but rather the quiet calculation of someone weighing a matter far greater than a seat assignment. Moments later, hurried footsteps echoed from the hallway. A man with a name tag that read, "Sean Bradley, Gate Manager," appeared, holding a tablet and wearing an expression of tightly controlled stress. Lindsay stepped forward, whispered a few words quickly, then pointed toward Aisha. Without further explanation, Sean nodded and approached row 2 directly, his voice firm. "Ma'am, I'm the gate manager for this flight. If you cannot provide the appropriate documentation proving your entitlement to this seat, we will be forced to contact airport security." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Some passengers began filming more deliberately. Others shook their heads in visible disapproval. Calmly, Aisha reached into her handbag, retrieved a slim portfolio, and gently unzipped it. Inside were neatly organized documents, many embossed with the Skylink Air logo. But neither Lindsay nor Sean made any effort to glance at them. Their minds, it seemed, had been made up the moment Aisha boarded the plane. "I have presented a valid ticket," Aisha said softly, "and I have not caused any disruption. Yet because I do not fit the appearance of those typically seated in this cabin, I have been questioned 3 times and now threatened with removal. Is this protocol applied to all passengers?" Sean frowned. You are escalating this unnecessarily. If you do not relocate immediately, I will have no choice but to call security." His tone was dry and impersonal, devoid of the empathy one might expect from a representative of a major airline. David Langston, still seated in 2B, subtly turned away, as if wishing to distance himself from the confrontation. "I really don't want any trouble," he muttered. "If there's a mistake, just switch seats. No need to make a scene." But Lindsay interrupted briskly. "You don't need to do anything, sir. This is an internal matter." Her gaze flicked back to Aisha, this time with the first flicker of doubt, as the woman's calm composure remained entirely unshaken. Aisha returned the folder to her bag, saying nothing more. But within the cabin, the mood began to shift. Some passengers no longer looked at her as a source of disruption, but as someone from whom they expected something unexpected. And they would not have to wait long. Because the test Lindsay and Sean believed they were orchestrating was about to slip entirely from their grasp. The suffocating tension in the first-class cabin did not come from temperature or altitude, but from the way eyes moved over Aisha Carter, some scrutinizing, others avoiding her, as if she were not just an inconvenience, but something that needed to be swiftly removed to restore order. Sean Bradley glanced at his watch, then shot a quick look toward the open aircraft door. He pulled out his phone, typed a few lines, and slipped it back into his pocket, as if planting a fabricated trail for the internal report. "We will document that you've refused to cooperate," he announced, raising his voice just enough to be heard by nearby passengers. "This incident will be handled according to our security and post-flight procedures." Aisha tilted her head slightly, her expression unchanged. She unlocked her phone and dialed a number. "Camille, connect me to legal affairs. I want a full recording of the passenger handling process initiated now." Her words dropped into the cabin like a pebble into still water. Lindsay froze momentarily. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said, but her voice had lost some of its sharpness. David Langston, seated beside her, still pretended not to hear, though his fingers had stopped tapping on his phone minutes ago. What Lindsay and Sean failed to realize was that their every move was being recorded from 3 different angles: live streams, personal videos, and the internal Skylink air system itself. Just 3 months earlier, Aisha had implemented a new policy mandating that all elite cabin passenger disputes be recorded and analyzed for service improvement. Of course, neither Lindsay nor Sean had any idea that Aisha herself had authored that policy. "Do you think you're playing a power game with this airline?" Sean scoffed, the corners of his mouth lifting in defiance. "We work here every day. We know who really belongs in this cabin." Aisha didn't reply immediately. She calmly reached into her bag and placed a black leather folder onto the tray between her and David. Several passengers leaned in to see more clearly. The Skylink Air logo gleamed faintly under the soft leather, along with the barely visible inscription, "Passenger Experience Evaluation." The looks in the cabin shifted once more, not curiosity, but anticipation. The intercom chimed a second time, this time deeper and more commanding. 5 minutes until final boarding. Cabin crew, please complete all pre-departure checks." Sean clenched his jaw. "I won't let one misunderstanding ruin this flight." Aisha turned to him, her tone gentle yet firm. "Misunderstandings can be corrected if people are willing to listen. Arrogance, on the other hand, leaves no room for second chances." From a few rows back, A deep sigh was heard. A middle-aged woman near the aisle whispered to her travel companion, "If they don't double, check the facts soon. This is going to blow up online within the hour." But they were already too late. On one passenger's phone screen, the hashtag Seatgate had just begun to trend, and this time, Skylink would not be able to erase the trail. The soft tapping of keys echoed as Aisha Carter reopened the laptop in front of her. She typed a few commands, and the screen displayed a dashboard of meeting schedules, service evaluation statuses, and Skylink Air's real-time media metrics. The last line updated by the second. Seatgate, 12.4K mentions, trending number 3 nationwide. She didn't need to say anything more. The internet had already begun to speak for her. At that moment, her phone vibrated again. Without looking, Aisha tapped to answer and set it on speaker. Camille Brooks's voice came through clearly. "Aisha, I've reviewed the entire incident via live stream. Legal is standing by. Crisis response is monitoring every frame." A brief pause. "Do you need me to intervene directly?" Camille asked. Aisha looked silently at Sean and Lindsay, now frozen in place, then replied calmly, "Not yet. They still have a chance to correct themselves." From row 4C, a passenger whispered to their companion, "She's talking like she runs the whole airline." David Langston, who had tried his best to stay uninvolved, furrowed his brow at the mention of Camille Brooks. He turned to Aisha. "Wait, Camille, is she the head of communications?" Aisha gave a slight nod, her eyes still fixed on the screen. That nod alone thickened the air in the cabin. Sean began to stammer. Who are you really?" Aisha looked up, locking eyes with Lindsay. "Would you like to double-check the system one more time before I proceed with the formal report?" Lindsay, for the first time, said nothing. Her hands trembled slightly as she glanced toward Sean, searching for direction. But Sean remained silent, his eyes unfocused. A light knock echoed from the front of the cabin, followed by a man entering, the ground operations supervisor, dressed in a slate-gray vest bearing the Skylink emblem. He leaned in and whispered something into Lindsay's ear, draining the color from her face. Aisha turned back to Camille on the call. "Patch me through to the Eastern Division executive. Connect via the aircraft's radio system." Sean snapped. "You can't access our internal channels. You're a passenger." But before he could finish, the aircraft's intercom came to life. "This is Elise Monroe, Regional Flight Coordinator, confirming that Aisha Carter is the authorized lead for first-class service evaluations, acting under direct authority from Central Command." The entire cabin froze in place. David Langston slowly turned, stunned, toward the woman he had dismissed just moments earlier. Lindsay and Sean stood paralyzed. Aisha, however, didn't revel in the moment. She quietly closed her laptop, turned to face them, and said, "I don't need people to know who I am to be treated with respect. But today, they're going to learn how to act properly, even when they think no one is watching." A lesson had just begun, not from a training manual, but from real life. And tens of thousands were learning it at the exact same time. The aircraft hadn't left the gate, yet something within the cabin had undeniably shifted. What was once a first-class section veiled in quiet prejudice had now transformed into an unintentional stage where layers of illusion were being stripped away, one by one. Aisha Carter reopened her leather case, this time without hesitation. She pulled out 2 folders and laid them on the folding table in front of her. One was an internal Skylink list, verifying priority passengers. The other a summary of regional customer complaints, both of which included the names of Sean Bradley and Lindsay Palmer. Lindsay lunged forward as if to swipe the documents off the table, but Aisha's gaze stopped her cold. "The report shows," Aisha said, her voice calm yet clear, "that over the past 18 months, 72% of seat disputes in the elite cabin on East Coast routes involved passengers of color. And the person who handled the majority of those cases was you, Lindsay." Sean clenched his jaw. "Where did you get those numbers?" Aisha didn't look at him. Instead, she nodded toward her phone. "Camille, please share the current internal data." Camille's voice came through the speaker, cold and precise. "According to the customer feedback system, Lindsay Palmer has been reported 43 times for discriminatory conduct. Sean Bradley has been the subject of 6 internal investigations, all of which were closed without disclosure." A sharp gasp came from a nearby passenger. An elderly woman in seat 1C shook her head and raised her phone to live stream, not just to record this moment, but to speak. "This is no longer about a seat," she said. "This is about a system of discrimination being exposed." Her phone screen flooded with comments. "Skylink must be held accountable. The CEO is on this flight. This is a turning point in aviation." Aisha stood, slowly, her eyes fixed on those who had tried to remove her from the seat that rightfully belonged to her. "I don't need you to fear who I am," she said. "I want you to fear what is wrong, even when no one is accusing you of it." At that moment, the captain came over the intercom. "Miss Carter, I have received a special request from Regional Command. This flight will be delayed 15 minutes to address an internal matter. We thank you for your understanding." The cabin fell into silence. But this wasn't the silence of disrupted schedules. It was the silence of realization. They had just witnessed something far greater than a misunderstanding. A system that had allowed quiet injustice to flourish was now being pulled into the light. And the most terrifying thing for those who had abused their power wasn't being accused, it was losing control of the narrative. In that lavish elite cabin, no one dared look at Aisha Carter the same way anymore. Those who had secretly recorded with their phones were now adjusting the titles of their videos. "Skylink CEO discriminated against on her own flight." A man in a suit in seat 3D spoke up. "I think she's the one who appeared in last quarter's annual report. I remember that face." Another voice whispered, "That's CEO Carter. I'm certain of it." Sean took a step back, his face pale as if he'd just been slapped. Lindsay stood frozen, her eyes no longer mocking or judgmental, but filled with panic and confusion. Aisha looked at them both, her gaze not angry, but piercingly lucid. "Miss Palmer," she began, "as an elite cabin flight attendant, how long were you trained in handling priority passengers?" Lindsay swallowed hard, her voice hoarse. 6 weeks, including simulations and on-site evaluations." Aisha nodded. "And in those 6 weeks, were you ever trained on unconscious bias awareness?" Lindsay remained silent. Aisha turned to Sean. "Mr. Bradley, in your 3 years as a gate manager, how many times have you personally intervened to request a passenger be removed from a flight?" He didn't respond, but his eyes darted nervously toward the other passengers, as if searching for an exit. Camille's voice came through the phone again. Aisha, crisis team reports we've surpassed 50,000 shares across major platforms. Media is awaiting an official statement. Aisha ended the call and looked directly at Sean and Lindsay. I don't need the two of you dragged into headlines. I need you to face your mistakes. At that moment, a security officer approached and whispered in Aisha's ear. The regional director is connecting live and would like your direction before issuing a statement. Aisha gave a slight nod, then turned to the still, stunned passengers. This flight isn't just a means of transportation from one place to another. It is a mirror reflecting who gets to belong, who gets questioned, and why. David Langston shifted in his seat, lowering his voice. Ms. Carter, if I showed any disrespect earlier. She cut him off with a steady gaze. You don't need to apologize to me. But you do need to ask yourself why you stayed silent when you knew something was wrong. The cabin fell into a hush, broken only by the cabin system announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We will be taking off shortly. But everyone knew that what was truly taking off in that moment was a seismic shift in power. From the one who had been doubted, Aisha Carter had brought an entire system to a standstill. No anger, no shouting, just an undeniable presence and a truth that could no longer be buried. The elite cabin of flight SL-298 was no longer a place to flash priority cards or rest platinum wallets beside champagne flutes. It had become a tribunal for trust, character, and power, not based on the name printed on a ticket, but on the dignity one shows when no one expects accountability. Aisha Carter stepped toward the cabin door, where the security team stood awaiting instructions. She gave a subtle signal. No need to escort anyone forcefully, she said, her gaze steady on Sean and Lindsay. But these two will not be joining us on this flight. Lindsay panicked. I'm sorry. I have a child. I was only doing what I thought was right. But Aisha didn't interrupt her. She let Lindsay finish without correction or reaction. When Lindsay fell silent, Aisha replied softly, You didn't verify the facts, yet you were quick to make conclusions. That's not following protocol. That's judgment based on bias. A flight supervisor stepped in to replace Lindsay. She bowed slightly to Aisha with quiet respect. Miss Carter, I'm Elise Monroe. I've taken over responsibility for this flight. Aisha nodded. There was no need for further introduction. Everyone on the crew now knew who they were serving, not because of her title, but because of the clarity and restraint with which she wielded power. Sean stepped forward, his voice barely audible. I've been with Skylink for 10 years. I don't want to lose everything over one mistake. Aisha looked him in the eye. The issue isn't the mistake. It's that you believed you didn't need to start over. Power is not a shield to mistreat others. It is a mirror to see yourself clearly when no one is watching. She signaled the security team. They will be escorted out quietly, with dignity, without spectacle. But a full report will be filed. Elise Monroe turned to the passengers and spoke over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, the incident has been resolved. Our flight will depart in approximately 10 minutes. Thank you for your patience and understanding. As Sean and Lindsay quietly exited the plane, slow applause began to ripple through the elite cabin. Not applause because Aisha was the CEO, not because she had just executed a dramatic reversal, but because in a stifling space where power is often exercised through tone or uniform, she chose to show it through composure and transparency. Aisha returned to seat 1A, fastened her seatbelt, and reopened her laptop. As the plane began to taxi, she glanced out the window. The sky outside remained as vast as ever, but the air inside the cabin had changed forever. On that flight, passengers didn't just witness a traveler being mistreated. They witnessed a system forced to confront itself, and once that system faced the truth, it no longer had the right to remain silent. The plane was cruising steadily through the sky, but inside the VIP boardroom at Skylink Air's headquarters, that very afternoon, the aftershocks were still unfolding. Aisha Carter sat at the head of the walnut conference table, the silver-plated Skylink logo gleaming behind her. To her left was Camille Brooks, Director of Communications, and to her right, Alex Rains, Head of Legal. A large screen displayed live video feeds from regional directors, senior HR, the crisis response team, and members of the executive board. "Elise," Aisha said, addressing the screen, "I want a full report on the internal conduct records of Sean Bradley and Lindsay Palmer over the past 3 years, especially any complaints indicating racial bias." Elise Monroe, the officer who had taken over flight coordination earlier, nodded. "We've gathered the documents. Lindsay has received 43 customer complaints and has never faced disciplinary action. Sean, 6 internal investigations, all closed due to lack of evidence." "It wasn't a lack of evidence," Aisha said slowly. "It was a lack of courage to confront the truth." She opened the folder in front of her, pulled out 2 formal letters, and placed them on the table. "These are their termination notices." A tense silence spread across the room. "They will receive severance packages according to their contracts, but with a clause prohibiting them from returning to any division of Skylink in the future." Camille interjected. "The media team is fully briefed. The hashtag #SeatGate has now surpassed 1 million mentions. Most public reactions are positive, especially after learning that Skylink took decisive action. But the press is waiting for an official statement." "We'll release our statement at 6:00 p.m., Aisha responded. "It will center around 3 points. Discriminatory behavior will never be justified by procedure. Our internal systems will undergo a complete overhaul, and Skylink will invest in implicit bias training for all frontline staff." The HR director on the screen nodded. "Miss Carter, we've already designed the new training program. It will be mandatory for all flight attendants, gate supervisors, and customer service representatives. It covers bias reflex awareness, crisis handling, and responding to racially sensitive feedback." "Very good," Aisha said. Then she turned her gaze to the end of the table, where David Langston sat uneasily. "Mr. Langston, I want to thank you for speaking up later in the cabin. But your initial silence also contributed to what unfolded. However," she added with a faint smile, "your willingness to publicly apologize after recognizing your mistake is also worthy of acknowledgement." David nodded, visibly moved. I would like to step down from my honorary advisory position at Skylink, but I'd also like to help implement the new corporate culture training, because I've seen firsthand the damage silence can cause." Aisha nodded, her eyes revealing the first sign of quiet approval. "We've addressed the accountability part," she said firmly. "Now it's time to talk about recognition." All eyes turned to her. "Ms. Monroe," Aisha turned to Elise, "for your composed, impartial handling of the situation, and for standing by the truth when it mattered, I'm recommending you be appointed Regional Cabin Supervisor for the entire East Coast, effective next week." Elise's eyes widened. I don't know what to say, except thank you." Aisha smiled. Say it through action. Show others how to lead with clarity instead of control. The boardroom sank into a respectful silence of agreement. That day, Skylink didn't just fire 2 employees. It laid the first foundation stone for a new service culture, a system where kindness was no longer the exception, but the standard, and power no longer measured by name tags or uniforms, but by how people treat one another when no one is watching. 6 months after the incident that shook the industry, the crisp autumn sky above Skylink's Chicago headquarters carried more than just a change in weather. It carried the signal of a corporate culture being reborn. In the high-level strategic meeting room, CEO Aisha Carter stood before the executive board, presenting a comprehensive reform report titled Dignity First, Grounded in Human Worth. Behind her, the screen displayed numbers that left the entire aviation sector in quiet awe. Racial discrimination complaints down by 87% in just half a year, customer satisfaction up 31%, and the number of employees proactively reporting internal misconduct had doubled. Skylink's stock, which had dipped slightly after #Seatgate, had not only recovered but surpassed its all-time high since the IPO. "We didn't achieve this by avoiding crisis," Aisha said, her voice calm but firm. "We achieved it by facing the truth and acting from principle, not fear." Regional directors took turns reporting on implementation progress. 100% of frontline staff had completed unconscious bias training, and 72% of middle managers had undergone real-world scenario simulations. Notably, Skylink's internal AI system had been upgraded to analyze behavioral data in real time, detecting early signs of conduct violations. But success wasn't measured in numbers alone. Aisha turned to the final slide of the presentation, a handwritten letter from an elderly passenger who had witnessed the incident on flight SL298. "Thank you," the letter read, "not because you're a CEO, but because you chose not to stay silent like so many might have. I carried silence with me my whole life. You gave me a reason to break it." The boardroom fell silent. Aisha looked around, her gaze resting on each person for a moment, imprinting the message. Reform isn't a one-time initiative. It's a long-term commitment, sometimes exhausting, sometimes doubted. But if we truly believe in the dignity of people, then this is not a campaign. It's a mission. After the meeting, she walked down the hallway toward the top floor, where Skylink's core values plaque had been newly etched following the reform. At its center, the words stood out. "Respect is not optional, it's operational." Elise Monroe, now the director of Eastern Flight Services, waited for her in the hallway, holding the rollout report for the Wings of Equity Scholarship Program, aimed at supporting students of color pursuing careers in aviation. Aisha nodded, taking the file. "Good. Make sure it launches at the first HBCU by December. We're not just restructuring, we're creating access." As she passed the glass doors overlooking the runway, Aisha saw a plane bearing Skylink's new emblem, a pair of wings rising from a mirrored circle. It no longer symbolized outward prestige, but a journey of inward reflection. She knew then her greatest legacy wasn't a successful tenure, but a new standard that could never be lowered, a standard that forced an entire industry to re-evaluate itself. From the moment she was told to vacate her own seat to this very moment, Aisha Carter had not only reclaimed her place, she had redefined what that place meant to the world. Aisha Carter's story was never just a confrontation between one individual and an entire system. It stands as a vivid testament to a principle every true leader understands, that power is not meant to defend a title, but to redefine justice through silence and action. In a world where prejudice often hides behind the veil of procedure, Aisha's refusal to erupt in anger or seek revenge. Her choice instead to lead with clarity and resolve serves as a wake-up call to the entire service industry. Dignity is not something that can be misplaced, not even in a single seat. If you believe that respect should never be a privilege but a standard, like this video to help spread that powerful message. Don't forget to subscribe to follow more stories where conscience speaks louder than noise, and change begins in moments the world tends to overlook. And if this story moved you, leave a comment with 3 words: worthy of respect. We want to know, would you stand for kindness the way Aisha Carter did?